Dr. Christie Kederian, you and I met for the first time. It was on the set of KTLA's Weekend Morning Show. I think this was 2023?
2023, yeah.
Okay, you had just had a baby. I was still married. And you were there to talk about, I think, dating terminologies and sort of the do's and don'ts. I was still married at the time, so I'm thinking like, what is
This is irrelevant, yeah.
Yeah, ghosting. I'd never heard of that term before. I'm learning it now.
Yeah.
So you're a relationship doctor. What does that exactly mean? What do you do?
Sure. So basically, combine my background as a psychologist with my experience in the dating world. So I became a matchmaker around 10 years ago at eHarmony, kind of did some research in compatibility, worked with people. Some were high profile, some just that were wanting to outsource their love life, really got to know them as a therapist and then vetted people for them as a therapist. So kind of did that background assessment and understood, okay, is this person a potential red flag or Mr. Right for this person? So then I would connect them with my clients. And that kind of started my journey into specifically focusing on dating, kind of blending the inner work with more like strategy. How do we navigate modern dating?
That sounds like so much fun to me because I'm someone who's like a lover of love. So I find relationships and the dynamics between people so fascinating. How did you like decide this is what I want to do? Where did you grow up? What was like dating for you when you were younger?
Yeah. So for me, same thing. From a very young age, I was always obsessed with like love stories, Disney princesses, all the things. I went into psychology because I was always that friend that people would come to for advice. And I felt like, I love people. I'd love to learn more about them. So I studied psychology at USC. In my senior year, I took a class on marriage and family therapy. And when I first kind of learned about how someone's identity really is impacted from their closest relationships, it all clicked for me. My background, I'm Armenian, and my faith background, I'm a Christian. So it just all of relationships kind of tied into how we relate to our parents, how we relate to God, ourselves. And it kind of all became clear, like, I want to learn more about how relationships impact like who we are. So that kind of started my journey into becoming a therapist, a marriage and family therapist, and then psychologist. I worked with a lot of couples in premarital as well as just marital counseling. And I felt like I wanted to learn more about connecting the right people instead of seeing people that maybe weren't a good fit and trying to work it out. And then when I started working at eHarmony, that's when I really learned all of these strategies and then kind of bring them to clients today.
What was dating like for you when you were younger? And how did it kind of like mold this decision?
Yeah. So a lot of and I think it's probably cultural, but it was very you don't really date. You kind of just get to know people and then maybe it will evolve into something. So that's kind of what I saw all throughout. My parents met through kind of like an unofficial matchmaker. It was a friend of my dad's that connected with my mom's aunt, that sort of thing.
I met
came to the house.
My ex-husband through a setup too.
Somebody like that. Yeah. So I kind of thought, okay, the perfect person can just show up on my doorstep because that's how my dad came to my mom. But I was, had a rude awakening. That's not really how it worked.
What was the rude awakening?
So it was all throughout my 20s, I was, kind of getting to know people just in the community, but just kept not working out. I was like, this isn't a good fit. And as I learned about therapy, remember in my first kind of courtship relationship, I was in my first couples class at USC in marriage and family therapy. And I remember kind of learning about certain patterns. I'm like, this guy does not fit any of these things. So
do you feel like when you're growing up Armenian, I'm Armenian as well. And I feel like it's a very traditional culture. So you're learning all these, techniques for relationships and the psychology behind it. Do you feel like there was ever a conflict growing up where this is not exactly what I'm being taught at home though?
Yeah, I think that my parents specifically just had a really good relationship. So they kind of modeled, whether consciously or subconsciously, what a good relationship looks like. But I know that just the concept of therapy was not really, it was very foreign to my family, my extended family. So I remember kind of learning about just different dynamics, different potential mental health struggles. And coming into that class, I was like, oh, no one in my family struggles with mental health. That's totally that thing. And then by the end of the class, I'm like, oh, everybody's
crazy.
So it's kind of that we just don't have the language for it. And I feel proud to kind of be a trailblazer in that way to my extended family and community of normalizing therapy. So now if I go to a wedding or someone has an issue, I'm like, oh yeah, I can connect you with someone.
Now
and
it's everywhere.
Yeah, totally.
I feel like psychology has become so part of popular culture and part of it thanks to social media, right? All those one-liners people post or the videos. I mean,
exactly.
We all get sucked into it, but I feel like now people are aware, what's your attachment style? What are red flags? All these little things are now very much part of the conversation. But back then it was like, not at all. No one went to therapy. It was like very hush hush and taboo.
Exactly. And I think a lot of it is obviously from our Armenian culture, just kind of more of our history and the fact that we were in survival mode for so long. There wasn't this focus on like,
it's a luxury, right, to go to a therapist.
It's like, you're lucky you're here and alive. So,
just
tough it out. Yeah.
Yeah. I certainly grew up with that mentality as well. My parents are divorced. So that was my model for a relationship. However, from a very young age, it's like I knew what went wrong in their marriage, you know, and I had this idea of what I wanted. But, you know, I feel like once you get to a certain age, especially in this community, you can't help but be so impressionable. And so when you meet someone who comes from a dynamic that's possibly stronger than yours, it's so easy to get sucked into that.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And oftentimes it's like that awareness combined with like society's expectations of like, okay, like we just tough it out or whatever that story is, depending on your culture, then you have a really hard time differentiating, okay, what's me and what works for me from my cultural beliefs and what's not really working for me. And that's more of my responsibility to kind of thrive and be able to kind of do things that our ancestors weren't able to do and really live the life that we want to live. And that's what they, you know, kind of gave us that opportunity for now. And so I think it's about like kind of rewriting that narrative and not saying, oh, okay, I have to do things the way that they did it. And rather saying, oh, they kind of paved the way for me. So I could kind of stand on their shoulders and do and kind of create a more deeper and more thriving life than I might have had the opportunity back then.
Do you feel like the generation now is doing that when you have clients who are, you know, women in their late 20s who are not married yet or in their 30s? What's the understanding now? Are people actually taking the time or do they still feel like this pressure?
I think it's either one of two ways. Either they kind of saw something that they really don't like and then they're swinging the pendulum the whole other way and they're saying, you know, I don't want a family, I don't want marriage, I don't want anything that, you know, my parents or grandparents taught me because I felt like they were a terrible model, or they're kind of still trying to pave their own way, but they're taking that like more positive example from their families and saying, okay, I like some of what you did, but I think I need to do this a little bit differently. And I think that's more of the healthy way to do it and not say, okay, nothing that my parents did was good or worked. It's more seeing the nuance and the gray area of like, you know, maybe they were together because of that shared culture, devotion, and values. And that's great. And that's what you're looking for. But there were other things like maybe chemistry or other things that you also want now. So I think it's great that they're able to, you know, live in a society where if you turn 30 and you're still single, it's not like all hope is lost.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, I think it's just different.
I have the biggest soft spot for women in their 20s who want to get married now because it's what happened to me.
Right.
I just want to shake them and say, I'm sure he's amazing. I'm sure it's the best, you know, decision, but please take your time to get to know yourself.
Yeah.
That's something we are not taught. At least it wasn't taught to me. And what's ironic is that I grew up in a family where marriage was not something they pressured whatsoever. If anything, when I met my ex-husband, I was 21 and he had certain qualities I was looking for, but it was so coming from the wrong place, at least, you know, what I was looking for in him.
Yeah.
And I just put this pressure on myself that, oh, we've been dating X amount of time. He's talking engagement. It's normal. It should just happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And was that normal just from like your friend group or also like your
I think friend group, family? But at the same time, it's like I was always looking for a certain male figure because of how I grew up. You know, my father wasn't around as a kid. And so I always was searching for like that strong male presence.
Right.
And my ex-husband being 11 years older had that, you know, and naturally he just has that. And I gravitated towards it. But when you are so sucked into one attraction, you sort of forget the other things.
Totally. Yeah. And that's so common. It's like they could have one thing that you're really looking for, but you think that that's the only thing that's needed for you to feel a certain way. But really, like there's a bigger picture painted. It's kind of like the analogy I give is like there is a puzzle and you're like, oh, I found this piece. And that might have been the missing piece from your childhood of like, oh, there was, you know, a strong male presence. But then you need the other pieces to really make the whole puzzle work. But we sometimes get so hyper fixated on like this one thing that we're not able to see kind of in the bigger picture how, oh, actually we really need more of these pieces to kind of finish the puzzle. I had a client, she wasn't Armenian, she was kind of more from an Asian American background, and her parents were like all like duty. That's why they got married. And she kind of swung the opposite direction to like, she didn't meet anybody that actually shared her values. It was all she was looking for was chemistry, because she, growing up, kind of created this story that, oh, my parents were missing chemistry. They didn't have a good relationship. So all I need to go find, like, national treasure hunt is this chemistry. And the reality was that wasn't really leading her to, all the relationships were like a month or less. It was all very casual, and she wasn't really getting fulfilled that way either. So it's kind of like, how can we find someone that, you do have the chemistry with, that's important, but that's not the whole that's not the whole cake. It's like we need a little bit more to fill in the gaps, because we're not single issue daters. We're not like, okay, this is the only thing we need. We really need a lot when we're choosing a life partner.
Absolutely. And it's so much better when you're older because, excuse me, you can identify these things within yourself. But when I was younger, I looked at, my own family. I come from divorced parents, and it's like everyone in my family's divorced. So I felt this pressure, like I have to be the one that does it right. So I have to see this through. I'm not going to be a quitter, because that's how it felt to me. Yeah. I equated boundaries with being difficult because I come from a lineage of women who are very accommodating. And, when I went into this new relationship, for me, it was, almost like a tidal wave. It's this huge family. They're wonderful people. They're embracing me. Even though it's happening only 4 months after meeting, it's a good thing. So why do you say no to it? And I almost became like the thermometer in the room. If it felt a little cool, let me warm it up. If it felt a little warm, let me cool it up. It's because I felt this need to be approved because I was chosen. I was chosen to be a fiance. I was chosen to be a daughter-in-law, a sister-in-law. So now I have to live up to this role because I don't have my own understanding yet. So I'm trying to fit into all these roles.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's really a common thing that often happens is like we see something and we're like, and we had that experience growing up and we're saying, you know what, no, I'm going to be like the hero here. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something totally different. But then we often kind of connect more to the story than actually like what's best for us. Because we're like, okay, I'm going to do this no matter what. Because as a kid, you might have wished that happened for your parents, but you didn't understand like, oh, actually like this might have been better. And that might be the case for you too, like in adulthood. I had a lot of clients kind of go through a similar journey of feeling like, okay, if my parents were this way, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to be the, generational
the maverick in the family.
Breaker. Yeah. And like feeling like that only looks a certain way, when the reality is maybe doing the opposite and saying, okay, yeah, this isn't what's best for me, is the way that you kind of rework what that narrative was growing up.
Right.
I think that's really important to kind of notice. Okay, we think that the way we're going to rewrite our parent story or our ancestor's story is to do this one thing, but it actually might be something else.
Their story is not our responsibility.
Exactly. Yeah. It's that pressure and burden we often feel to like, okay, I have this opportunity, so I'm going to do things differently. Often that should look a lot different than we think it does.
Right. So when you see young women coming into your office or to your practice, what do you tell them to do to kind of check themselves first if they're ready for a serious relationship?
Yeah. I think the first thing that we kind of sit down and do is like understanding your why. Like, what is the reason that you want a relationship or a marriage? And usually if it comes down to, well, I feel like I'm getting old, or, I want to have kids, or that's just what people do at this age, or whatever that is, then we have to dig a little bit deeper, because, none of those reasons are necessarily bad in themselves, but that can't be the only reason.
Because you'll compromise on character and so many other things.
Those are kind of that's the formula for settling, to be like, oh my gosh, all my friends are, getting married. Okay. I get that. That's hard. And also like, you're definitely going to settle if that's your only reason.
How do you know you're settling?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my definition of settling is being with someone that doesn't treat you how you want to feel. So settling is way more about how you feel in the relationship than how the relationship looks. A lot of people think, oh, I married, he's 6'5", blue eyes, finance, whatever that video is. It's like, oh, to everybody else, that looks like you did great. You're not settling. You're in an amazing relationship. But how does that relationship feel for you in the day-to-day on the inside?
Especially now with social media, how things look. Let me have that perfect engagement shoot so that I can one day have that perfect family shoot and the Christmas card. We get so wrapped up in how we present our lives as opposed to really looking at our lives from an honest place and trusting that intuition.
Yeah.
I feel like the one thing I lacked when I was younger is that self-trust, because only when you are so brutally honest with yourself can you say, I see these things in this person that may not be agreeing with who I am, but I am compromising or putting, blinders on. Until you get so honest with yourself, that's the only time you can make those intuitive decisions.
Yeah.
You don't have those tools at that age. It's almost like insanity to me when someone says, I'm getting married at this young age.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always say that the person that you should be the most honest with is yourself. And sometimes that's really hard.
It is really hard.
Yeah. Because we don't want to know the truth. We're the best at kind of putting those blinders on. And so that's where I think, therapy or having like a trusted friends or close people in your life that can show you those blind spots is really, really valuable. That's why I really recommend therapy in your 20s, because good therapy will help give you that mirror and a safe place to process those thoughts and notice, oh yeah, like this is really who I am versus not. Having your own like goals, identity, if that's a career, if that's just, a hobby or a passion, that's so important because that helps you understand like who you are in context of other people, in context of the world, of service. And I always say like, it's so important to know your why behind what you're looking for too. So if it's something that, you're looking for something because it was the opposite of your parents, or because it was your parents, or because, you had this first love and you want to kind of relive that, like there's nothing wrong with that, but being honest with yourself about that why then really helps you make educated decisions of like, oh, okay, I really want a guy that's like over 6 feet. Okay, what's my why around that? Whatever that is, that's going to be really important for you to understand, because then it leads you forward and you can honestly ask yourself when you're dating that 6'5" guy that has nothing else you're looking for, like, okay, is that enough?
My kids will be tall.
Yeah. Is that enough? A good reason.
How do you determine your whys? How do you know what you're looking for?
Yeah. So I would say when I kind of help people map this out, the first thing that we kind of break it up into different categories. So there's a few things that are like non-negotiable. Like these are the most important things to you. That really comes out of your values. So values-based dating is understanding, okay, what are the things that I live my life by? So we kind of look through like this list essentially of values. It could be like kindness, humor, fun,
Your
diligence.
non-negotiables.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is where it's like, okay, we need someone who aligns with that. So if one of your values is like hard work and ambition, you need someone that aligns with that. You can't be with someone that's just like punching the clock and doesn't really care about what they're doing. That's going to be a really big mismatch. Or if you come from a faith background and like your values really align with that faith, you need someone who aligns with that. Otherwise, it's going to be incompatible. So those things are really important. Then there's things that we call like to haves. These are like hobbies you have in common. Maybe they're looks.
6'5" blue eyes.
Yeah, 6'5" blue eyes. These are like, this would be nice, but if I find someone great that doesn't have that, then it's okay. And then we have the deal breakers. Those are things that they do that are not a fit for you. So if it's like, using substances or smoking or whatever that is for some people, it's like, okay, this is just not a fit for me. And you don't even entertain getting to know someone who already has those things on your list. So once we can kind of come from that place, then we can assess, okay, how do I get to know if someone meets this criteria or not?
Got it. And, when you have clients coming now, many of them are probably married and they've been together for a long time, and maybe they made a decision for better or worse. Now they're in this marriage. How do you sort of do a temperature check if you are married to the right person or if you are really happy? How do you look at your life that way?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So when we do couples therapy, we usually kind of identify what was the reason that people actually made that phone call, because couples can be struggling a very long time and not pick up the phone and call a therapist, either because it's taboo or they think they can still make it work. So first we have to kind of figure out, are they here with someone has their foot out the door already, or are they really trying to like make this work? The second thing we look at is how willing is someone to change? So how willing are they to grow? Obviously, I'm a therapist, so I really believe that people have that opportunity to change. Anyone can do that work, but are they willing to really look at themselves and look at their role in the dynamic? And we call it like a dance in couples therapy. It's like, okay, we've been doing this dance. It maybe doesn't work very well. Is this person willing to kind of do their own individual work as well as communicate with with their partner of like, hey, this dance isn't working. Let's try a new dance. And so I really kind of assess like the willingness to grow. And that's why I tell people even before they met someone, that's the most important quality. If someone's willing to grow, to do the work, and it's hard, it's not easy, but to really look at themselves and make those changes, then they're a good potential partner.
How do you know if someone has that ability or if there's someone who's very stuck in their ways? Because I feel like it really comes down sometimes to the power dynamic in a relationship. And oftentimes women end up being the one changing for the man.
Right. The first thing I say is you want to notice if this person is just changing and doing the work already for themselves. Like not even because, their wife's dragging them to therapy or they're doing this in order to get a girl. Like, are they already doing work for themselves? So whatever that looks like, I know more westernized culture is like going to therapy or, reading books. But if you have a growth mindset, does this person already have that? So before they do something in context of being with you, that's a really good indicator. So have they gone to therapy before? Are they, in a community of some sort? Are they listening to books, reading podcasts? Like, are they interested in that? If not, then that's a good sign that maybe they're not willing to do that. The second thing is just asking really directly, hey, like, what are your thoughts around like therapy or self-improvement? Like, if it's like, oh, I don't need that. Or, then it's assessing if we were to move forward and there was a time where I asked or we needed that, would you be open to it? No, whatever, then automatically you're in a bad place.
So what do you do if you have a partner that doesn't want to go to therapy, that doesn't believe in therapy or doesn't want to put in the work?
Yeah, that's when it gets really difficult because either you're going to kind of go through the motions and just focus on yourself in the relationship. But
I feel like when you focus on yourself and you do the growth on your own, oftentimes you grow out of that marriage or that relationship.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. And I think the relationship only works if there's both people working on it. If there's only one person dancing and the other one standing there, it's no longer the dance relationship.
I just think a lot of times men, especially now, when they see themselves as the provider in a relationship, they think, I don't need to go to therapy. I'm so busy working, providing for this family. So they do have a lot of pressure. And I, give men a lot of credit. I think we live right now in a society that expects so much, especially in the materialistic sense, so they do feel that pressure to keep up with the Joneses, to make sure that their family has everything. I get it. But at the same time, that can't be a reason to shy away from internal work, because that's really important to maintain the longevity of the marriage or of the life you're trying to build.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think that sometimes we get caught into this like, oh, things are so busy, but then they end up always being so busy. Like there's never a good time to get help, but there's also never a good time for a relationship to not work out. So it's kind of that opportunity to first say, hey, like, this is what I need. If they're not able to kind of meet you there, communicate, whatever, then we need the help of somebody else. So whether that's, if they don't believe in therapy, maybe that's like someone in the church, like a counselor, or even just like a trusted, maybe mentor couple or somebody that can kind of help. Because I think one piece that's really challenging in more of a westernized society is like couples are kind of isolated. And so especially men or just anybody that doesn't want to do that work, they don't have accountability. So it's really hard to foster that change and growth if you don't have accountability. If you don't have someone saying, hey, I know we talked about communication last week, but then it sounds like, you just kind of blew up in anger few days later, like, let's talk about what happened and let's stay accountable. Whereas like everything's kind of in isolation. And so when we have struggles, we just kind of move on and try to get through it without, showing that there's anything wrong. But that just kind of leads a relationship to rot.
Right. I feel like sometimes the conversations don't even come up because people think taking accountability means taking blame. And no one wants to feel like they're at fault. And it's so easy to slide into that defense mechanism. We all have it. What are some tips for better communication with couples? Say you've been married, you have kids, it's hard to find the time. how do you still stay on the same page?
Yeah, something I tell women a lot, and it's hard when it feels like you're really hurt in relationship dynamics, is that you're trying to embody more of a softer approach can really be beneficial when it comes to communication. So oftentimes we feel like if we're not being heard, we have to kind of come in with like that same level of like directness or like aggression, or like, oh, you need to do this and you didn't do this again. But if we can come from a softer place, that allows the defenses to come down a little bit and more room for vulnerability. So let's say your husband's supposed to take out the trash. That's kind of the agreed upon roles in the household, and they keep not doing it.
How can that statement come out two ways, right? Encouraging versus condescending.
Yeah. So the condescending way would be you
didn't take out the trash again.
You're supposed to take out the trash every week. You didn't take it out again. I have to do everything in this house and nothing gets done if I don't do it, et cetera, et cetera. That's the condescending
That creates not only resentment for the person saying that, and I feel like resentment is the biggest mistake in a relationship.
Yes.
And then also you're setting this person up for essentially failure.
Exactly.
Because you're almost implying like, well, you weren't going to do it anyway.
Yeah. And you're embodying like the mother role, and no one wants to sleep with their mom. So I tell women that all the time. Or
their dad.
So it's like, if you're going to be them, oh, you did something bad again, they kind of revert to that little boy. And then they're going to feel like, okay, I either have to defend, I have to hide, I have to throw a tantrum and like, freak out. So it's really about kind of having a softer approach to it, using humor, being lighter. So it's like, oh, babe, like, I can grab the trash this time if you want, or something like that. Like, oh, I noticed you weren't able to take out the trash. Like, is there something I can like help with? I know it's really busy at work. Like something where it's just soft. Like I tell clients, just tell yourself like soften, like whatever it is, just try to come from a softer place, because when you have the end goal in mind, like what do you want to have happen? Do you want them to just like feel bad and you feel like you're doing the right thing? Or do you want to feel more connected at the end of the day and have the trash taken out? Okay, that's the end goal. How do I go about it the right way?
I feel like sometimes people love to spar. At the end of the day, it's almost like we're taking out some of our frustrations on our partner.
Yeah.
And I will say there's one thing that I really do like about myself is that I always look at my words and how I'm using it to hurt people versus uplift people.
Yeah.
Like I'm very conscious of that because for me, language is the biggest love language. So when it comes to like a fight, that last jab, I'll never throw it out there.
Yeah.
I just can't. For me, I feel like there's no going back from that. So when I'm with someone who will say certain things that they know are going to hurt me, that's the biggest like, I can't come back from that.
Yeah, totally.
Because I wouldn't do it to you. That's how I look at it. We don't play, I don't play dirty with my words. And I feel like if someone does that or says things that sound unappreciative, that's the biggest trigger for me.
Yeah, because your love language is words of affirmation. Yeah,
words of affirmation. So when it goes the opposite way, I always think, you're willing to say that to hurt me while I would never do that to you.
You means you don't love me.
That's how I interpret it.
Yeah. And often people, we talk about the love languages, but people don't recognize that there's the opposite of that. And you can weaponize someone's love language in order to really hurt. That's where it really hurts them. And sometimes people do that because they're looking for that kind of reaction or pain, and they almost project that. So they see somebody else hurting. There's that saying, hurt people. Yes. And it's like they use that in order to kind of get that reaction. So it's almost like if we don't give that reaction, or we shift and kind of, okay, I am hurt, but this isn't the person to get that healing or help from. So I'm not going to, show that weakness necessarily, but then talking about it in a safe place like therapy of like, hey, like you really weaponize a thing is going to hurt me when we're in a fight. And one of the things that research found is that if a couple knows how to fight well, that we don't kind of take those really low digs, even when we're upset, that's one of the indicators that relationship's going to last. So it's like, we can have a fight and it doesn't necessarily have to go to those levels where we're really hurting each other.
I have a lot of girlfriends who are married, and we all have kids kind of around 7, 8 years old. So life is busy. Soccer practice, tutoring, homework, all the stressors and just life and all the things. I find that when we're discussing, relationships and they say, he just doesn't get it. He doesn't help me enough. And then I snapped at him. And it's like this cycle that we're all in because no one has the time to stop and really look at how we're talking to one another.
Yeah.
And the damage we're doing by trying to uphold everything else, right? A successful life. But behind the scenes, we're just tearing each other down.
Yeah. And I always say, I'm a new mom, so I'm not going to speak from that much experience, but I think the reality is that a real successful life is healthy and happy relationships. So anything else you have to knock off the schedule if they can't go to this one class or they whatever, but they have like a present mom that's there for them, as well as like a dad that also is there for them and loves them. Like that is doing so much more for them long term than if they miss like a soccer league or
so take
whatever.
the pressure off.
So it's figuring out what's going to work for your family. I know it can feel hard because you feel like, oh, all their friends are doing it, they're going to get left out or whatever that is. But there was some research recently done about how if someone had like a kid had like a present mom that wasn't rushing around, their anxiety levels were way less than if there was always rush involved. And I think that's so important to pay attention to, is like, how can I be present? That's the number one thing that's going to help my kid become a healthy person.
It feels impossible to be present sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, just the fact that we have to tell ourselves to consciously be present is already a problem.
Totally. Yeah.
It's like, just be in this moment. And I often find, or it's something I've discovered recently, in order to slow down time, because we're all complaining, where did the time go? How's my child 5? How's my child 8? How am I 38?
Yeah.
I feel like the only way to slow down time is to be present. And not be so far ahead of the conversation, not be so far ahead of like, okay, 3 months later, we have this recital or we have this vacation to go to, but actually just sit in the space that you're in.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so hard to do that.
It's so hard. Yeah. And I think sometimes the constant like filling our lives with activity almost kind of sets the kids up in a negative way to like have that same hurried, rush, not present life, and feeling like my life has to be so full that I don't even have space to be with myself. And sometimes that's what the business is about. It's like we want to fill our schedule so much because sometimes it's really uncomfortable to, like we talked about earlier, to like ask yourself the hard questions and get to know yourself. Like that space has become really uncomfortable. There's not a second we're not, scrolling through our phone or doing something that's taking us out of that present moment. And rather than saying, okay, why is this moment so uncomfortable? How can I shift that? We're just going to fill it with something else.
How do we know if we are filling it with too much? Because I feel like across the board, when I look at my friend groups, everyone is complaining about the same thing, that they have too much going on, not enough time. They're not fully enjoying anything because they're not present. They're not there. Their mind is always racing. How do we do that? Look at our lives in a critical way and say, okay, this soccer practice can come out because you know what? At the end of the day, what am I doing this for?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's more is not necessarily more.
Yeah, exactly. It's really about honestly asking yourself why you're involved in whatever you're involved in. More current research on families also shows that these like individual activities, so things that like one sibling's doing this and one sibling's doing that and the parents aren't together, or there's not like that involvement, that's actually not helping our kids at all. Like the more helpful time is when you have that more family time, like you're going on a little vacation or you're doing something together, or you're having dinner time, whatever that is. So figuring out, okay, like what are these activities? Why am I doing them? Are my kids actually enjoying them? Sometimes we're just like putting them in because they should be in there, but they don't actually
because their friends
like
are
that.
doing
Exactly. So it's like kind of figuring that piece out, but really prioritizing and scheduling that family time. So it's like, if it's evenings, just kind of making that time more sacred so that we're not just kind of doing another thing that's supposedly helping their development, but actually the research is not showing that that helps the development.
And when do you think, or what do you think rather, is a key in maintaining that intimacy with your partner, given all these things, that fill our days, fill our lives, fill our energy? Like, how can you carve out time and make sure that you're still staying connected?
Yeah. So I think it's really important to carve out like a date night. And it feels like probably when I tell that to couples, they're like, what? We don't even have like 10 minutes to like see each other.
But you can do date night at home. You can open a bottle of wine and
when you're
just
after
sit
bedtime,
together.
just sit together, leave the phones. I know that's really hard, but leave them in a little bucket or drawer. Just having that time together, whatever that looks like, is really, really important so that you can also kind of help differentiate. When we talk about like a family system, it's like the parents and then the kids, but oftentimes now what's happening is it's just all blended because we're all doing things together, or dad's at work or whatever. And there's not this like hierarchy of like, okay, we're a unified unit here. We're the parents and you're the kids. And that creates a lot of anxiety for kids. They need a really strong structure of like, if you're a single mom or dad, it's it's like, okay, I'm the parent, you're the kids. And then, so you have that quality time and then you have family time as well. So I would start by trying to do that like date night. So yeah, if it's at home, your kids are asleep, whatever it is, a few hours, block it out without your phones and just kind of connect. And that time is not time to like manage the house and schedule. So oftentimes we kind of blur those relationship boundaries and it's like, we're the co-managers of the house or we're the co-parents or we're the whatever. So that's not the time to figure out, if Bobby is going to go to his soccer practice. That's just like connecting about your day, about yourself, interests, things you're reading, just like kind of pretending you're back in whatever you guys met and not,
keep getting to know one another.
Exactly.
And I feel one thing that we don't do enough right now in our society, because when we hear things like supermom, right, we feel like we have to live up to this ideal. I know that I certainly worked myself to the bone to the point where I burnt out. But I feel like we don't give ourselves enough grace. I know I wasn't, where we could say, the dishes will wait. I don't care. I'm going to go sit with my husband and have a glass of wine. We could do the dishes in the morning. But we are so obsessed with getting it all done. And then the guilt of not getting it done, where in reality, we live this life once. Can we just give ourselves some grace to breathe and not be perfect?
Yeah, 100%. I'm a really big advocate, as a working mom myself, of like getting help and creating a village. So if that's, having like a house manager, a nanny, your parent, whoever can help you be yourself. So you're not the super mom, the super wife, the house cleaner, the cook, the personal driver. Like we have to let go of that narrative, because then we end up feeling like we're not doing anything well, and we're again sacrificing what we really care about, which is that present relationship with our loved ones.
Those compliments sometimes, though, it's almost dangerous, because when you hear you're such a great mom, it's a wonderful
You're doing
thing.
It all,
You're doing it all. I would get a lot of like, you're super mom. You wake up at 3 a.m. and you go to work and you still manage to look nice. And then you get your kids from school and you make dinner 5 days a week and you still go on date nights with your husband and you still like to do all these charities. And I'm like, yep, I do it. So when one of them was lacking, I felt this huge amount of guilt. And then that just, again, puts you in this state of anxiety where you're not being present. You're not actually living your life. You're just thinking of keeping your life.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And what people don't realize is like at what cost,
Exactly.
that you might not have noticed it at that time, but at some point that train is not going to keep going. Like, so it's like at what cost and at what point am I willing to kind of live for that approval versus saying, okay, like this isn't really feeling good to me. I need to, express what I need.
Are you seeing a lot of clients burnt out?
Yeah. So many clients come to me.
What are some of the signs if someone is burnt out?
Yeah. I would say if you come to a point where like you have a stressful situation come up and you just kind of lose it, that means there's not enough margin in your life. So a lot of, especially moms I work with, it's like, okay, we're getting the kids, someone's late, and we just kind of like snap at a kid or whatever. And we're like, why did I do that? Then the shame comes. It's really about that there's not enough margin, because life's going to happen. There are going to be things that curveballs that you didn't plan for, even if you're the most type A person that's scheduled everything out. And if you don't build in that margin and you notice like that kind of just puts you over the edge, it's like the icing on the cake, that's a really big sign that you're burnt out and something has to shift. So if it's, hiring some help, if it's getting some help from, your spouse or partner, whatever that is, like you need to build that in before something happens. Cause, God forbid something else happens down the road, then, and everything falls apart, then you're not going to have that resilience and that kind of built in, hey, life's going to happen. And I care about more about myself and making sure that I'm healthy, mentally healthy for my kids, than making sure that everyone gets to their like extracurriculars.
Well, because we're not taught that.
Yeah.
My mom, I tell her all the time, you don't have a way to self-soothe.
Right. Yeah.
Meditation, all these things that are very new right now, but she wasn't taught to do that.
Totally. Yeah.
And, it's like now we're finally learning just to regulate our nervous system.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I think for a long time, especially culturally, our moms kind of got that approval from, how nice their house looked,
the more
or like
you do.
whatever. And that was like what their accomplishment was. And I know I had a very different experience than my mom, because I never kind of got that like sense of like, oh, I did something great from being a good like housewife or whatever, because my work was such a more fulfilling piece of me. So I almost didn't really care if, whatever, we had like a bunch of people over at my house and it wasn't like, perfectly clean. I didn't really care because I had something out, like a different identity piece. Whereas my mom, my aunts, like it was like the way that they hosted Thanksgiving or the way that the house, like whatever, that's like a direct like reflection. And so a lot of moms feel like that about their kids, is like how well my kid's doing is like,
a reflection
that's my accomplishment. And if that's not going well, that means I'm, a worthless mom or whatever, which is not the case.
Of course. And we tie so much of our identity into all of these roles. And I feel like when you go into a relationship with a lack of identity, and then you now have these new, responsibilities, it's almost like your identity completely gets lost.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And that's where we have to kind of take away that mom guilt piece, because I think that's where, if we struggled with kind of creating that identity for ourselves and then we just throw it into a relationship, throw it into our kids, then that's when later on we wake up and we're like, wait, who am I?
Who am I?
Yeah.
What's your advice to women who are married, who have kids, who kind of feel like I'm losing myself in this life?
Yeah.
What can they do?
Yeah, you have to carve out time for yourself, because without that time, you're not going to have the opportunity for your own interests, your own identity to flourish. I always say it's like you can't have quality time if you're not there. So
right.
like, when you think about like with your kids, it's like, we try to do all these things, give them advice, parenting advice to parents, that sort of thing. But if you're not present, if you're not showing up next to your kid, there's no way that you can build that relationship, right? So it's the same with yourself. If you don't have that time carved out for yourself, then you're not going to be able to get to know yourself. So same with like dating. If you're in a relationship, you're dating someone and you never see them and you don't have any quality time just like talking to them on dates, you don't know who they are.
Okay, we're going to talk about dating in a minute because that's a whole new ballgame.
Yeah.
So when you're in a relationship, and this is something I get asked all the time because I recently went through a divorce, people ask, when do you know if it's over?
Yeah.
What are some of the signs that you see?
Yeah. I would say that number one thing that we had talked about is like, if they're not willing to grow and do the work and change whatever dynamic's not working, then it's a pretty good sign that it's not going to work out. Someone has to be willing to do their own work, including you. You have to be willing to do your work. But if you're the one that's dragging that, you're carrying that load, and they're not willing to look at that, then that's kind of their way of saying like they don't want to make this relationship work, because it takes two people to do their own work to make that relationship a healthy relationship. So it's figuring out, okay, like what isn't working for you in this relationship? Is that something you can live with? And if not, if it is, at what cost? Are you willing to put up with that cost? Is there other support you can get? And obviously this doesn't apply if you're in like a domestic violence situation or someone has like an active substance problem that they're not willing to get help with. Like those are situations that like clearly someone has to do their own work in order to make a relationship work, because they can't make a relationship work if there's those dynamics at play. But I think it's kind of processing for yourself, okay, like what do I need them to do to make this relationship have a potential future? And if they're consistently not willing to do that, then they're saying that they're willing for that relationship not to work.
And what's like a time frame? Some people who, let's say, are in therapy, they say, okay, we've been doing this for 2-3 years now. It's just not going anywhere.
Yeah, I would say growth takes different time for different people. But if someone is willing to show up, there could be a few steps forward, a few steps back, but they're willing to show up. You see some progress. You're able to kind of process that with a professional. It's able to say, yeah, I do see some growth. It might be very slow growth, but you have to kind of notice, okay, am I willing to be with someone who's willing to grow, or is it just kind of too far gone? And that's the ideal situation, is kind of getting into therapy before you're 1 foot out the door. A lot of people are kind of like, I've been just dealing with this, white knuckling through it for so long that I just feel like this growth is way too slow. So it's kind of earlier on figuring that piece out. I'm a big proponent with a lot of our clients that, they find a partner through our program, that before they get engaged, actually doing pre-engagement counseling. My husband and I did that. I think that was really great, because it's like before you're committed. I work with a lot of people that, have that commitment or engage or walk down the aisle knowing like, hey, like, I don't think this is going to work. And because of that pressure in society. But I think that pre-engagement, I know for me, really helped. Like we kind of got everything ironed out there. We figured all of these things out with a professional before even kind of making that commitment. And then when we were engaged, it was more like, let's just plan a wedding instead of getting engaged to someone and then going maybe even to premarital counseling, being like, oh, I don't really know how this is going to work out, but you already make that commitment. So you kind of felt like, oh, I'm already engaged. I have to just make it work.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a big one. So do you think people are making better decisions now when they're partnering up because we have access to all these tools, and maybe in a way we're more self-aware? Because on the opposite side of that, all you hear from people is that there's no one out there. It's a superficial world. People have their values totally twisted. Where are we in all this?
Yeah, I think on the one hand, more choices has made it more difficult. So we call this the paradox of choice. And it's this idea that if we have more options, we're going to choose more quickly and we're going to be happier with our choice. The reality we found from research is that it actually makes you feel like, oh, maybe I could find someone even better than this person. So sometimes more choices kind of makes us feel like we're less happy with the choice. Like maybe we should have chosen someone else. So that's one thing that I think specifically dating apps have created, this idea that there's always someone else. There's always someone better, instead of seeing someone in front of us as like, oh, we can partner with this person and make something great work together. Yeah. Right. So that's on the one hand, but I do think a lot of the tools when we have around like getting to know ourselves, what we're looking for, kind of there being more of a deeper focus in relationships. I think sometimes people getting married later now than ever is almost a positive thing, because it might be harder to meet someone that's a fit. But when you do meet someone that's a fit, you know that they really are a fit with who you really are because you've done that more inner work. So I think on that hand, it's like, it's a positive thing because we're able to say, okay, like I have access and I'm proximity to a lot more people than maybe we did before, dating apps. But now I can kind of assess more closely based on what I'm looking for if someone's a good fit.
So you know so much about relationships. Was it difficult for you dating?
Yeah. Yeah, it was so difficult. I downloaded my first dating app when I worked at eHarmony. And I kind of had this like parallel process for people. I almost tell people it's like the more you know, the harder it is. Sometimes.
I feel like you remind me of Jennifer Lopez's character in that movie, The Wedding Planner.
The Wedding Planner, totally. Yeah, it's like she's seen it all, not work out.
She knows it all.
Yeah, so I felt like a lot of, in dating for me, a lot of it was like, oh, I knew like red flag right away. So I had to kind of give myself some patience to like understand more about people.
That's intimidating too for a guy. Like she knows every trick in the book.
Yeah, they're like, oh, are you reading my mind? I'm like, I'm a psychologist, not a psychic, but yeah. So a lot of that was challenging, but I kind of took it as like a social experiment. Like I'd be dating, I learned things, I'd share with my clients. And now I kind of see that as well, like being married, kind of helping people understand, okay, like these are things that are really important when you're like knee deep in, changing diapers and like, you're like, there's nothing glamorous at this point, when you're a new parent or whatever, but it's like, this is what really matters. So when I have clients come to me being like, oh, I need all these things, like half of those things aren't really going to matter when you're like in the thick of it with someone, but some of these things are really important. So you should focus more here. So I think it gives some insight. I love kind of like going through the process alongside a lot of my clients too.
So when you're dating, I know that you said you met your husband later in life. Do you think it's better to wait to a certain age? Like what's like an ideal marriage age for a woman or for a man?
Yeah. So more recent research found that around 28 to 32 is what we call the golden age to get married.
Okay.
So that's kind of like the ideal age that they found that relationships that get married in that window are like happier, more long lasting, they more satisfaction. So in my perspective, I think that the reason it's that age is because people have had more time to discover who they are and what works for them. And there's less of like okay, I'm just going to kind of be in a relationship to be in a relationship. And I think sometimes when it's a first marriage that's older than that, it can be more challenging to sit because it feels like, well, my life is so good right now. I've built everything I want. Like it's very hard to let someone in, and maybe you've been through some hurt before. So you get kind of more avoidant, and you're like, the first thing that's wrong with someone, you're like, sending them out the door because of the past experience.
Right. You think now you have the, sort of the reason to be pickier. I get that. How did you meet your husband?
So we actually met when we were kids at Vacation Bible School. And the reason we know that is because our parents knew each other. But then we re-met on a dating app on Bumble when we were, I was 30. Yeah. I was 30. He's 35. And we literally lived like a few blocks away from each other, probably across each other a million times. But I was writing my dissertation at a coffee shop that he lives, like was right near where he lived at the time. I'm like, we probably passed by each other a million million times, but without the dating app would have never connected. And like
See,
our dads
go.
knew each other in Lebanon, like all these things. So I always tell clients, it's like, it's not what you think it is. Like he wasn't a complete stranger to me. Like I kind of could have known him, but the dating app, you know, put us in front of each other.
I think one thing the dating app probably did for you is that, you know, if you had seen him at like a family event,
I would never,
you probably think like, oh, he's attractive, but it's not necessarily in a romantic space.
Exactly.
But when you meet with the dating app, it's like, okay, you're obviously here to meet someone. I'm clearly here to meet someone. So it sort of breaks that barrier.
Totally. Yeah. And I love the success stories of so many of our clients where it's like there's someone right in front of them that they didn't even notice in whatever way because of different seasons or whatever. And it's like, that's one reason I love kind of technology now is that someone could come in front of you that you knew in high school or whatever. And then you connect with them and you're like, oh, wow, like, you know, this is the right timing now.
So when you look at people to set up as a matchmaker, what do you look for?
Yeah. I often, obviously we have the things on paper, but I'm really looking for like temperament and personality. So like when I get to know a client, I'm really getting to know like what type of sense of humor do they have? Like, you know, and then when I meet the client, I go on kind of that pseudo date. I'm like, oh yeah, she would think this guy is like so funny. Like he's kind of witty, but not like over the top, like goofy. Like,
right.
You know, so it's a lot of nuance that you kind of learn about someone over time. And there's little things that, you know, I don't want to scare anybody. There's little things you notice about people when I've met like thousands of people at this point that really kind of put you over the edge of like, oh wow, she'd really appreciate that. You know, he offered to, you know, buy the coffee or whatever it is. Like those little things that I think like once you get to know those things, like we were talking earlier about your love language, once you get to know kind of how someone really is naturally, it's a lot easier to match up with someone. I think the thing that I learned a lot at eHarmony when we researched compatibility is actually the more similar you are, the more compatible you are. So there's little things that's like, okay, if we have more similarities, if someone's just natural love language for you was, you know, words of affirmation, they were really spoken that way and that's how they received it, you guys probably get click really easily instead of trying to teach someone. Yeah. Instead of trying to teach someone and translate your love language and have them learn a whole new language. It's harder.
My ex-husband's love language is gifts, acts of service, which is amazing. You know, he's the guy that would always take out the trash.
Yeah.
So, you know, but I appreciate those things. However, it's not the top of my list.
Yeah.
I would rather you don't take out the trash, but say A, B, C, and D.
Yeah, totally.
It's just how we're wired, right?
Yeah.
How are we wired like that?
Yeah. That's the hard thing that I teach couples all the time is it's not about doing your love language really well to your partner. It's about learning what their love language is and being able to like learn that language and speak in it fluently so that it doesn't feel like a chore to say nice things. It's like I'm going to learn that and that's going to feel natural to me because I know that's how my partner receives love. So they don't have the acts of service, then, you know, it's okay. But I'm going to really learn how to speak in a way that they can hear that I love them.
What did you like most about your husband when you met him?
Yeah. So kind of alongside the thing that I tell clients is that when there's like a little thing that I appreciate, that really goes a long way. So we met, I was writing my dissertation. He just like showed up. We were supposed to go on a date the next day.
Talk about him.
And it started raining and I had my computer with me. Started raining at this coffee shop. And I had my computer because I was writing my dissertation when I was leaving. And he's like, oh, let me grab something for you. So he went to the barista and said, oh, do you have a plastic bag? Because it was kind of a random rainstorm. So he got a plastic bag and like put the computer in it. I thought that's so thoughtful that like he, you know, would go and just like figure out how to make my life like a little bit easier. And he's that kind of person. But it showed me that really little thing of like, let me problem solve and figure out how to like help her in this moment. Kind of showed me like, okay, his heart is like to really like help people and that kindness was there.
Right. And I think that's the biggest tragedy when people do really love each other and their heart is in the right place. They just can't find the tools to relate to one another.
Yeah.
And that I think is really unfortunate in our society too. It's really the tools. It's how we talk to each other. You could have a great relationship, but it's like you're just not on the same page to make it work. Or one person has sort of evolved beyond, you know, because I read that you meet people where you are emotionally, right? And you might have been there 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but now you are someone who wants to relate differently. You're someone who wants to feel differently. And if you can't get on that same page, it all goes back to what you're saying, growing together.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay. So my situation, you know, we grew apart. And so I made the decision to end my marriage after 10 years of being married to someone. What is your advice to someone like me
Yeah.
Now being in this new space, how do I look at, and so many people out there who are divorced or in a similar spot or getting out, of a long-term relationship. How do you now look at yourself and say, what do I want?
Yeah, I think you're in an amazing place, even though it might not feel like that. But I think you're in a great place because you've kind of carved out your own identity, your own passions, your own like career and community. And being in that place, I think, is really a powerful and empowered place to be. And I hope you feel that in the dating world. Yeah, no, it's hard, but I think that really will help you really identify, okay, this is the growth I've experienced. This is what I've been able to like create. And then I can also create a partnership that mirrors like this really full and amazing life that I have now. And so the thing that I would say as you're going about the dating process is, as hard as it is, not letting someone new kind of carry the baggage of someone old. So I think that's a really hard thing that a lot of people struggle with when they're first entering the dating scene. Is like, oh, this reminds me of my ex or this whatever. So automatically they're not a good person.
No.
But
okay.
yeah, the reality is that people are human. They're going to make mistakes, but it's noticing what was the thing that really didn't work and making sure that new person, they might remind you of them in a lot of ways, and making sure that new person doesn't, kind of have those same traits. So it's figuring out, okay, what's the difference there? Really processing, okay, what was it that really made this not a good fit for me? And then in the dating process, I would say give yourself some time to explore. So that doesn't mean that you have to like date, thousands of people, but give somebody maybe a little bit more of a chance than you would initially, because that's your kind of learning, like see it as like a learning
what
lab.
You like.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm asking myself this question essentially the first time in my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I, sort of got off the market at 21, which is very young. And now I feel like I have a better sense of who I am. And it's more like, who would that person be?
Totally.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, we think we know, but again, having that space to bend, I think, the rules a little bit.
Yeah. And a good thing if you kind of are re-entering the dating scene, you have not for a while, is notice who are your like really natural best friends. Like if I was to ask you to describe your best friend, like what are a few qualities that they embody?
Oh, my best friend.
Yeah.
Okay. So my best friend is Lucy. What does she embody? She's not judgmental.
Okay.
I think we love that about one another, that we're just fully accepting of each other's flaws
and
quirks
anything.
and anything, everything. And we have similar, I think, backgrounds as far as our families and how we were raised. So that connects us and allows us to have a lot of grace in the relationship. What else? And we have fun together. We have a lot of fun together.
Nice.
And what else? So you're saying I should look for those qualities in a partner.
Yeah. So similar values, similar temperament, that someone you can feel like you can talk to you can talk with them about anything. Yeah. Fun. You guys have the same like fun, same sense of humor. So a lot of what you described, a lot of what we find in friends is like, oh, they're really similar to me. So I really connect and click with them. But then when we find a partner, we're kind of looking for the opposite. So the good thing about having done a lot of your own work is you're not necessarily looking for someone to kind of complete who you are, because you've kind of,
we did that once before.
Exactly. It's not that you complete me, Jerry Maguire thing anymore. It's like who can come alongside me and like help enhance my life.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the second time around, we definitely are more self-aware. And I think I took, and I'm taking a long time to just sit with myself, because you have to look at also, how were you culpable in this relationship? I have to look at, what did I do? What didn't I do? I don't want to carry any of that into a new relationship. And at the same time, you want to clear the energy.
Yeah.
Because people can feel it if you're coming with baggage.
Yeah, 100%. I often tell clients, like, if you're tempted, if they ask you about past relationship and you're tempted to kind of give your whole diatribe, that's where you have to kind of look at yourself and like, how can I get comfortable just kind of giving the elevator version? Like, I was married, didn't work out. And now like I'm looking forward to moving on or whatever, finding someone that connects with me in this way. That's really showing that maturity and that you've really moved on. But oftentimes people kind of use the date to be their therapy session and be like, this person did this and that.
Right.
And the other person's thinking like,
oh,
they're not, are you really ready? We don't know.
Okay. So you're a matchmaker. How would you match me up? I'm dying to know.
Okay. So now that I know a little bit more about what you're looking for, and I feel
6'5", blue eyes.
Yeah. But also like the personality type. I mean, I feel like you would probably go well with either like an athlete of some story. Yeah. Are you ever attracted to athletes?
I mean, who isn't?
Okay. I feel like I'm kind of seeing that for you because of a few qualities. The first to be more like kind of hardworking, driven, that sort of thing. They're very like disciplined in whatever they do, because they have to kind of like, be the best and also be like committed to that. But I think you also need someone who has a little bit more of a goofy, like fun side as well.
For sure.
So I think someone that kind of embodies that.
I think people look at my job and the persona at work and it's like serious.
Yeah.
But I'm not.
You're not.
I mean, I can be, but at the same time, laughing for me is like number one.
Totally.
If you can make me laugh,
that's great. Yeah. And I think they're good under pressure, and you kind of are in more of like a high pressure job too. But if they're able to kind of like articulate themselves well, that would be the key to kind of look at. But I think you need someone that's like really shows that commitment, devotion, kind of can excel in what they're doing, but also has like the fun side as well.
So for you, because of the theme of our show, which is breaking through, what was like the biggest breakthrough you went through as a young woman to kind of be ready for a relationship, being also someone who's like in the world of psychology?
Yeah. I think for me, it came when I was 25. I had applied to my doctorate program and was in like a long distance situationship / courtship at the time. I didn't really know what path I was going to take. It was kind of those like, two roads diverge into a wood poem sort of thing. And I felt like I applied to the doctor. I was like, I'm not in a relationship, I'm not getting married anytime soon, so I'm going to apply. But then I got into this relationship and I kind of was put into this decision of, okay, am I going to pursue this career? And potentially, like, it was a long distance relationship at the time. Like, is that not going to work out? Or am I going to, just kind of see where this goes and defer getting more education? Because I think culturally at the time, it felt like, okay, you're at the age where you should be getting married, not kind of be committing to a doctorate program. So I felt like my moment there was kind of going against what I think naturally, or maybe even a few years before, I would have done of like, oh, okay, let me just wait. Maybe I'll get married and then I wouldn't want to get my doctorate or whatever. And saying, actually, if this person's the right person for me, or whoever is the right person is going to support my own dreams and feel like this is a positive. And even if it was long distance, like we can make it work, the timing, whatever. And that didn't end up happening, but I'm so glad I chose kind of myself and my own passion at the time. And that ended up later as I was dating kind of being a filter for me of like, is this person really saying I need to be the most important thing in your life? Or are they saying, actually, you need to be, and whatever you want to do is the most important thing. And we can kind of come together and I can support you in choosing yourself. And that ended up being kind of a criteria I didn't even know I had later on dating of like, okay, how does this person really make space for me in a relationship where I tend to be the person that wants to make space for everybody else?
I feel like, and I love you say that, choosing yourself, that's such a big thing. And I think it's a beautiful thing to choose yourself. Unfortunately, it gets a bad reputation because we correlate choosing ourselves with being selfish.
Right. Yeah.
At least that's what I was told. When I was getting a divorce, all I would hear is, you're being selfish, you're being selfish. But it's like, if I don't choose me, who's going to?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's the most important thing to pay attention to, as well as just our cultural expectation. If you live in a more collectivist kind of culture, it's like, okay, what's best for everybody? But as we know, that ends up kind of being best for nobody most of the time. So it's like in that path, whatever ends up coming through with that. That's what I feel like I really learned is like when I choose myself, then all the right things fall into place. When I don't, then everything falls apart. So I have to do that first. It's kind of that love your neighbor as yourself thing that we always say, but we don't focus on the loving yourself thing. We're like, okay, well, we should just love our neighbor and then put ourselves last. And we think that's going to work out.
How do you love yourself?
Yeah. I think it first comes to figuring out, once you figure out like who you are and what you want, making that space to really pursue that and saying, okay, maybe it's you have a kid, you have young kids and you do feel some of the guilt if you're going to go to work or pursue a passion or, for me, I was, when I had my son, it was at the same time I got a book deal. I'm writing my book and it felt like so much mom guilt was coming in because I was like, oh, I want to be with my baby, but I have to write this book. And there was that kind of decision I had to make that when I really pour into myself, if I put this off, I would feel resentful because this was kind of that moment in my career that I didn't want to put that on my kid. And that became more like, hey, I just have to be comfortable with my choices and knowing that they're hard at the end of the day, but ultimately this is what's going to be the best thing for me. And then when it's best for me, it's best for my son, and then best for my husband and family, because then I can show up how I want to, instead of being like, the resentful, kind of what a lot of women I think get that kind of bad rep for. And that's when we're hard and not soft, because we're putting ourselves last. So we feel like, oh, no one else is valuing us. But when we value ourselves, then we treat other people we teach other people how to treat us too.
Right, exactly. And our relationships oftentimes are a mirror. So if we're not reflecting what we want to get back, how can we set that standard?
Yeah, exactly. It's like we have to learn, and that comes from how we talk to ourselves. How are you putting yourself down all the time because you're not getting to every soccer practice? Like, kind of really valuing and showing your love language to yourself. Like, what are those love languages that you have? Mine is words of affirmation too, and also like gifts. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to treat myself. That feels good to me. So showing ourselves the love languages that we also want from other people then also teaches us and sets a different standard for who we attract into our lives. Like, if you're treating yourself well, you're with friends and community that like they treat you with love and respect, it's going to be very hard for some guy to come in and treat you poorly, because it's like, wow, they're going to stick out like a sore thumb. But if we are used to talking to ourselves a certain way, or being around friends that aren't really uplifting and positive, then someone naturally is going to come into our relationship and be like, look like the people around us too.
Okay. And if someone wants to go into therapy, what are the first steps that they can do that? How do they pick a therapist? I always think that if you come from a culture like ours, it's almost helpful to go to someone who speaks that language and gets that culture.
Totally. Yeah. That can be really helpful. Similar to like how you choose a partner, like someone who has like some similarities is great. So if that's like you have a certain faith background, that's really helpful, or like a cultural background that really informs how you live, that can be really great, because you don't have to translate like, okay, that might feel really unhealthy to some cultures, but in our culture, it's kind of normal. Exactly.
They understand.
Yeah. So I would say, a great way is to kind of ask if you have friends that you trust, like see who, I always tell people about therapists that I've been to. I'm like, this person's great. So it's nice to kind of have that experience. But you can also kind of search on your own as well. A lot of therapists now have social media followings, and they're becoming a little bit more personal, which I think is great, because you can kind of see who you connect with on more of a personal level, instead of just like, something that's on their website. So I think that social media is a great place to kind of see how someone works, what they believe, and what they really help with. I think seeing your specialty and noticing, oh, actually, I really need to work with someone who knows and works with women who need to kind of find their voice, or whatever that is that you're struggling with, then connecting with someone like that is really helpful.
What was your breakthrough in finding your voice? Because I think to be an academic and to, work in an industry where it's all about love and all about relationships, when did you find that breakthrough moment where you're like, okay, I'm now in a position I can give people advice? Because you have a social media platform. As I mentioned, in the beginning of this episode, you were on KTLA. We were talking about relationship and love. When was that moment that you felt like, I can be that person to give that advice?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is that like the way that I view myself always is like I'm just kind of a fellow traveler. Even though I have all this academic experience, I'm like kind of going through life and sharing those things. I think it's in the more like vulnerable moments and like the sharing how desperate I felt when I was a bridesmaid 19 times before I got married.
Bridesmaid 19 times?
Yeah, like sharing that story with people and being like, I get it. Like I've been there, like feeling like, oh, I'm never going to get married, never going to have a family. Like, all those struggles, being vulnerable and open about that. I think like the first time I was more like, hey, I don't have it all together. Even if I, show up like I'm the expert, like I love sharing research and kind of empowering people with that. And like, we're all humans at the end of the day. And I think that breakthrough for people is really like inspiring, because I think we assume that people have it all together. But I think when we have more honest conversations, people are like, oh yeah, like, finding love isn't out of the cards for me because someone's been through things and they found it. Or, getting an education or having this career, it's not like it's so impossible. It's more like, hey, we're making it like, real, that we're real people going through real things and that you can overcome those things. So I think that's the big kind of breakthrough for me when I started sharing more about my personal journey, and it helps connect and relate to people and not feel alone.
Okay, I want to know more about this bridesmaid 19 times. At one point, aren't you like, okay, what the fuck?
I had a big family, but But I was towards the end, I was like, I think I just have to start saying no because I just felt so like I heard that, you know,
you're
Armenian,
like the bridesmaid.
I was like,
I'm
comparing with that Katherine Heigl character, the 27
Yeah, exactly.
Girl.
You're like every rom-com.
Yeah, that's still single. Yeah, so I feel like I kind of went through that whole I'm always the bridesmaid kind of identity, and then broke through that and saying, you know what, I deserve to kind of be the main character and like put my own love life first.
Okay, going to the movie thing, the holiday. It says you need to be the leading lady of your own life.
Yeah, totally.
But how do you not be the bridesmaid all the time, or be the non-leading lady? Because I feel like so many women, they're okay taking that smaller role.
Yeah. I think the thing that you want to pay attention to is that when you are the leading lady, it doesn't mean your life is perfect. So you're going to go through the hard things, but it's shifting that narrative of like, I actually deserve all the things that I want in life. And I think when you're kind of playing the sidekick role, you're saying, oh, other people, that's good for other people, but not for me. Or like that, good things happen for other people, but not for me. And then you're shifting that. So when you have the spotlight, there's challenges that come with that, but you're saying like that's worth it for me because I am I'm the main character here in my life.
So when you met your husband, how did you finally know he's the one?
Yeah, I think part of it was really seeing someone who really understood me and supported like who I already was, which I think that's kind of where I encourage people in their 30s to meet someone, because I feel like he had so much going for him already and I never had to kind of like dim my light around him. And that was a really big indicator. Obviously, he shared a lot of values and things that I wanted in a person, but on a personality level, he was kind of like my biggest like fan and cheerleader, but not from a place of like, he's not doing what he wants to do. Like he
also has his own life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's so important for people to have their own lives.
Totally.
I mean, now being in this space, where I'm divorced, I feel like I was the first one in my friend group to get engaged at 21. That's super young, right? So you automatically get catapulted into that leading lady position, right? Because it's like, oh, I'm the one planning the wedding. I'm the one doing all these things. And now it's like, life in backwards in reverse, where I'm unpacking all that and kind of learning all over again who I am.
Totally. Yeah. And I think like with my husband, something I noticed that was different is that like he was really happy and proud of himself in his own life. And I hadn't really dated a lot of people like that. They either like really didn't like their job or something was going wrong. And it was like, when you don't like yourself in your own life, then that's really a big challenge.
And not to fall for people's potential.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that's a big one, especially when you meet someone young. You are so stuck on, well, we're building together. He's going to be great. Give it some time because I don't know. What is that balance, right? Because we hear all the time, like, don't give up on people. They're going to get there. They're going to get there versus meeting people when they're already whole.
Right. Exactly. And that's one of the things I think it doesn't always come with age, the maturity thing, but it's like if a guy doesn't have their stuff together at 40, 35, like then you kind of know, like, but when they're, younger, it's like, it is. Everyone is in the potential stage. So I think that's one of the positives of getting married older is that you kind of already see like where they're at. Yeah. Instead of saying, okay, this could be a potential. And I would say a really underrated green flag he also had was like having really close friends. Like I think a lot of guys don't have like those kind of deeper friendships where they're talking about like real things. It's just surface level. Oh, we go out or we're going to this, sports game or whatever. Like they're not getting like deeper. And I think that was really refreshing that he had these like lifelong friends from like high school. They'd have like these long conversations about life. And I'm like, oh, that's a really big green flag. Cause I think for women that's normal, but I think guys, they just kind of put on this facade. They cut off that emotional, like deeper, vulnerable side, and then they don't have that support system.
Okay. I feel like we could talk forever.
I know
because we're so in tune with this stuff. But where can people find you? How can they follow along? Because you have such really good advice on social media, especially for the gals dating later in life.
Yeah. So you can follow me on Instagram. I'm on TikTok too at the Date Dr. Christie. And then my website, therapyfordating.com. I have everything there on how to work with us, coaching or matchmaking.
And so you're you're going to find me an athlete.
Oh, yeah. I got you. Already have like some people in mind. I'm like, let's see.
Oh, okay. So before we leave you, I just want to know really quick about your matchmaking services. How does someone get on board with that?
Yeah. So basically you reach out to us, you fill out an application so we get to know a little bit more about.
Who's us? What company?
My company and my team. Yeah. So on my website, you can see there's like a little matchmaking place, and then you fill out an application, that you meet with me, and we kind of have a consultation and see, okay, what are you looking for? You know, are you potentially a good fit for our services? And then we go into the process. We get to know you. We go, vet people for you.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah. So we kind of do all the dating dirty work for you.
The dirty work, the legwork.
Yeah. So by the time you
genius.
meet them on a date, then they're kind of already vetted by, therapists. And then we kind of help you through that process. So after the day, we get feedback from you, from them, and see kind of like how things go along. So yeah, it's really fun.
If he ends up being crazy, I have only you to blame.
Yeah, exactly. We definitely weed out the crazies.
All right. Dr. Christie Kederian, thank you so much for being a guest.
Thanks so much for having me. This is so fun.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Breaking Through with Ellina Abovian. For our community to grow, please like and share, and also leave a review on this episode. Of course, you can find me on social media and let me know what you'd like to talk about in future episodes. Nothing is off limits, so let's have some fun.